So welcome back. We've been doing these weekly calls to initially help people deal with the crisis side of COVID-19 and now looking more into the recovery phase and the longer burn of dealing with the situation as various phases unfold. I'm often reflecting on my background as a survival instructor, and in the world of survival, there's two extremes at either end. They're not particularly useful. So at one end is the group of people that pretty much say she'll be right and wait and see what happens and unfolds. They have no plan. They have no real way of dealing with situations as they unravel on them. And at the extreme other end is the doomsday prepper, who is really well thought through and extremely well prepared for a very specific type of crisis. Also not particularly useful, because if anything other than the scenario they've prepared for happens, they're pretty much screwed. Michael and I, over the years, have had many conversations about forecasting and survival and the links between the two. And I'm delighted to welcome Michael Ford to the call today. He's the CEO and founder of Castaway Forecasting, which is a software company. They're doing massive things in the world at the moment, just on the verge of going global, launching into the UK. Massive here in Australia. They work with around about 50% of the top 100 accounting firms here in Australia, so you get some very interesting insights into business here. Michael himself is a reformed accountant, and their accountants can be wonderfully creative, I find, and Michael definitely fits into that category. People who think deeply and carefully about the state of the world, the state of business, and have a real mission and desire to make business better for both the people that own them, the people that work in them, and the broader community. He's also got some unique insights around this particular time that we're in right now. He owns and runs several businesses, and at the moment he's got one that's absolutely peaking, it's booming, and the other one is pretty much dead in the water. So he's seeing firsthand either end of that equation. So welcome, Michael. We'll have a chat about the dark art of forecasting, whether it's wishful thinking or whether it's doomsday, and how we can use it in practical and real ways to make a genuine difference in our individual, family and business lives.
Mike, I want to say thank you very much for having us on the call today. And thank you to everybody for joining us. It's a really interesting time, and I know that's a cliche, but there is great opportunity. There's also great threat right now, and what we do in the next month, 2-3 months, I think dictates our business future for the next several years. And I reckon there's some things you can do to really swing the odds your way, to turn challenge, adversity into something that actually creates a strategic difference in your business that will set you up for years.
Yeah, nice. So we've talked a little bit about that, thinking strategically and planning for different business scenarios and how forecasting can help with that. What's your take on all of that? Because there's a sense here that, if we, at one level, we could just go, oh, well, here's a warm figure. I forecast that we'll be 50% bigger by the end of the month. Although for those of us starting at zero, that doesn't sound any more appealing. But we could put any case that we liked, pluck any figure that we liked out of the air. How do you do forecasting in a way that's not just wishful thinking?
There's the $1 million question. I think this actually goes to the heart of forecasting any time, not just during COVID. Too many businesses think of forecasting as a maths exercise. Take last year, add 5%, and there's our forecast for this year. To me, that's never been the case. It's never really been what forecasting is meant to be. And when you take such a simplistic approach, you miss out on the strategic value of the conversations that you should be having. So, yep, we can make a spreadsheet work. There's the saying in our industry called, it works on a spreadsheet. So you might have a business that looks like last year plus X% is going to be fantastic. Problem is, if the numbers don't bear any connection to reality in the business, then there's no point actually doing them. So for me, it's always been about scenario stories. None of us can pick the future. And I want to say at this point that forecasting is not actually about predicting the future. because we can't.
Mm.
Who saw COVID coming? Really saw COVID coming. Um, Nobody saw it coming, but it doesn't mean you couldn't have prepared for it. So let's think about forecasting as an exercise in preparation. We design scenarios. We identify a bunch of different scenarios that are possible. One of which is, yes, you may well grow by 30%. It's not just the numbers you're talking about there. It's, well, what does it take to grow by that 30%? So when we look at, X number of different scenarios, we then talk through the story, what that looks like inside the business, not just 30% up, but actually in words. So, we recommend when people are sitting down to do forecasting, number one, they're not just going to forecast one set of numbers.
Mm.
Number two, the first thing to do is step right away from the keyboard, get away from Excel, get away from Castaway, get away from the numbers, and get a blank bit of paper. Let's start thinking about the possible scenarios that you could see, and then throw in a couple that you can't see, and start understanding what you may well do in your business if that scenario takes place. So this is how it works. You sit down in a group of people. One of the scenarios you've suggested is we'll grow by 30%. That might be an aspiration, it might be an expectation, it might be just a hunch. Next step is to say, well, how does that happen? Are we growing by volume? Are we growing by price? What is it that actually means we'll get up by 30%? And then you start working backwards to get to that 30% growth. What do we need to do? What does that look like for the business? Are we selling more product? If we're selling more product, do we need more warehousing space? If we need more warehousing space, do we need more people? If we're providing services, do we need more people? Or do we just increase the capacity use of our current team? It's starting to turn those 30% number, or whatever number it is, into actually a real story. And then once you figure out, then you look at what investment and assets is required and what costs are required. You actually write the story first. And only once you've done that, and you've done that across a number of different scenarios, do you then get to the keyboard and start tapping away. We've trained, 5,000 accountants over the last 10 years in these techniques. And what's interesting is as an accountant, I came from school to university to straight to the KPMG and PwC. We never got taught how to forecast. We never really got taught how business operations work. We got taught all about numbers, but not necessarily. And as a numbers guy, I love that stuff. But we didn't really get taught how the day-to-day activities of the business tie to the numbers. And that knowledge is more essential now than ever. So, I guess there's a few points out of this. And the first one, like I said, is that forecasting is never about predicting. It's about preparing. Okay. Just because you can't see tomorrow doesn't mean it's not possible. Therefore, we need to be modeling multiple scenarios, and not just doing the modeling on a spreadsheet, but modeling, starting with scenario stories, working through the implications of different potential paths, and then designing action plans. This is really the précis of today's session, because to me, so many great conversations come out of that forecasting process when we do it the right way. That it is a strategic power, or it's a strategic capability that every business, I think, needs to develop. We'll talk later on about my thoughts on budgeting.
Yeah.
But if you do forecasting right, it's like a performance management system in a box.
So we've been talking growth specifically, which is obviously one scenario, and then how much growth. There's a lot of desire for growth, it seems. When you speak to a lot of business owners, that seems to be one of the things that drives them. It's like, make it bigger, 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 bigger. And I've spoken to a number of people over the years that I've been working where that's actually something that's caused them massive problems. They've grown to a point where they've created a bit of a monster for themselves. I remember working for a while with a tree lopping company, and the guy initially started with a ute and a couple of chainsaws and an offsider, and then went up to a small truck with a chipper on it. And he grew from there to having multiple teams, multiple trucks, big contracts all over the place, massive amounts of gear. And I said to him, "So how's it going for you?" And he said, "I was actually more profitable when I was a ute and a couple of blokes.
Yep.
And now I've got a 12-year debt repayment schedule in front of me, so I can't get out of this thing."
Completely.
Where's as people are thinking about growth, and particularly, I guess, as we're moving into a recovery phase where things will be different, people will think about spending and products and how they engage external providers in different kinds of ways. Growth is certainly possible, but it doesn't seem like it's all that useful for its own sake. How do you kind of strike the sweet spot there?
Let's talk about what we mean by growth. There's always an assumption, I think, that when we talk growth, we talk increases in revenue. But revenue isn't any real indication of how successful a business is. It's got to be profitable revenue, and then profitable revenue that it uses your resources intelligently. So for me, growth has never been about growth in revenue. It's not even about growth in profitability. It's growth in business value. And maybe I'm being a little obtuse, but I reckon that's the sort of growth. So we've helped clients reduce revenue but increase value by getting rid of unprofitable parts of the business, by getting rid of customers who take up significant amounts of working capital, who don't pay on time, who cause major pain and the like. It's entirely possible to grow the value of your business by shrinking the revenue. Okay, so business value to me comes from two things. One is the ongoing, enduring profitability. There's a ton of different ways of measuring business value, but they all come down to two pieces. One is ongoing, enduring profitability or cash production. And the second thing is the investability of the business. How easily some external person could come in, grab the business, and you walk away. How much extra work is required to sort of hand the business over and the like. So if you've got a highly investable business, in other words, you've processized it, systemized it, made it so you could walk out tomorrow, and it's producing healthy cash flows and profit, then that is the most valuable position you can be in. That, in many cases, as we grow, the great risk is we grow by grabbing revenue. But if you start taking on the wrong customers who are demanding better payment terms and lower margins and are more demanding, you end up with the 80-20 rule. Those 20% of additional customers end up taking 80% of your grief. And I think we're seeing that. I've got a friend at the moment running a manufacturing organization, and he's still going through COVID. But what he's finding is lots of new customers are coming to him. Now, what we suspect is that the credit insurance providers have started tightening up. They won't cover some of these businesses. So some of these customers are starting to shop around for different suppliers to try and jump onto anyone who will extend them credit. At the same time, they're coming in saying, "Look, we can't pay in 30. We've got to pay in 60 days." They become highly demanding. So there is the temptation of growth. In fact, even today, there's opportunities for growth, but growing the wrong customers, growing through the wrong customers, ends up damaging your business. Among many things, the most precious asset is 6 inches of grey matter between your temples. And the more grief customers you take on, or the more grief you take on from customers, and we all know what we're talking about here. We've all got customers and clients and people who take up more mental space than they should. There's a real value to that. There's a cost to that.
Absolutely.
So being selective in growth, understanding that you're growing to try and build long-term sustainable business value as opposed to growing revenue, because revenue is a vanity metric. It's often said. I think we ought to be, it's really alluring when someone says, "We really want to work with you." It's alluring to take on that revenue, but as businesses, we get to choose, and we have to choose. We have to exercise the choice of who we'll deal with and how and why, what sort of business we want to build, and what the long-term implication of taking on both the wrong and the right customers are.
So there's a couple of questions that spring out of this for me, Michael. One is that, in a moment in time like this, particularly if a business has been particularly pounded, there's a real temptation to just grab any revenue. It's sort of a bit like throwing anything that floats at someone that's drowning. So question one is about how discerning do you think we need to be, and how do you balance that with the sort of immediate need for cash flow? And then the second question is, how do these sorts of principles apply? We've got a number of people on the call that are sole operators based around their own expertise, for example. So they're not really in the game of building a business that's going to have value for on sale. It's more about building their own value and proposition in the marketplace, I suppose. So yep. Could you say a bit about those two things?
Yeah, look, no matter whether you're a sole trader working from home or a multi-billion-dollar mining company, the principles of business are the same. There's a constraint. And if you're the sole trader, your constraint is that you've got 168 hours a week. And some of those hours you want to sleep. And some of them you've got to spend time watching telly and watching webinars and things like this. You've only got a certain amount of hours you can allocate to the productive revenue generation operations of the business. And so then you go, great, I've got X number of hours. Where will I allocate those? And you really, we all get the sense we want to allocate them first to the most interesting, respectful businesses and clients and customers we can take on. You're right. When we are short of cash, any cash kind of looks good, but we have to recognize that cash is not the only measure in business. And yes, I am assuming, I recognize, when you are desperate for cash, you're right. Any cash becomes attractive. But my first business started that way. First consulting business started that way. People didn't know me. I started consulting and grabbing any old customer. And what happened is I started grabbing any revenue. Sometimes it was bad revenue. And what I found is bad revenue has great friends. So those customers started telling their friends about me as well. They'd come on and niggle and haggle prices and wouldn't pay well. And it ended up being a nightmare until at the end of the day, I had to say, stop that. I'm now biasing my business towards only the best sorts of customers. And it's funny because good customers have friends as well. And they're actually looking for people who respect good business. What we have is the chance to invest our time the way we choose. And sometimes you might well think there is better longer term value in not taking the revenue, spending the time writing the book, spending the time doing the webinar or whatever it is, so that we don't make $1 today, but we make $2 tomorrow. I think, the problem of cash flow is when you're short on cash flow, it brings your thinking really close to your eyes. And when you've got such short-term thinking, you make poor decisions. Forecasting is a tool about lengthening your focal length, having you look further ahead, and so you're able to play off, look, I'd like cash today, but if I did something better with my time, I've got things I can do that will generate better cash in future.
Do you reckon there's an ideal time frame for that? Like that view? I've heard people say, I've got a 25-year plan, and my instant response to that is just because,
That's a 25-year guess.
Yeah, absolutely. At best, there's going to be lots of things that change in 25 years.
Yeah, there is.
Maybe some principles that would last for 25 years, but a plan that's a bit steep, I think. And other people that don't have one at all, just go downstream and hope everything works out well. So is there a sort of optimal time frame, do you think, when you're playing with forecasting?
The answer to that depends entirely on the pace of change in the business. If your business doesn't change very much, you might need to reforecast. We'll come back to the idea of rolling forecasting. You might need to reforecast every 6 months or maybe every year. If you've got a staid, boring business that's not shifting at all, you could potentially just shift it really slowly, like these big infrastructure businesses. We've got guaranteed government revenues and the like. Massive organizations can afford to reforecast slowly because their pace of change isn't big. As we come down to our level of business, I think we need, as a rule of thumb, every 3 months, we ought to be rethinking our forecast. We should be getting fairly detailed about the next 3 months worth of effort as a rule of thumb. So a really clear picture of the next 3 months and a healthy view of the 9 months after that. So 1 year ahead. One of the reasons I mentioned before I don't like budgeting, the old traditional method of budgeting, which is sometime in May or June, like about now, we set the budget for next year.
Yeah.
We do it, we make it very nice, we put nice borders around it in Excel, we send it to the bank and then put it in the drawer, and that's where it stays. It's all hard-coded numbers. It's last year plus X%, so it doesn't connect with activities. It's not useful for any decision making or anything else. What we much prefer is an exercise where every, let's say, 3 months, you sit down and go, right, here's what I thought would happen, here's what actually happened. So you do your variance analysis and then you reforecast. Over time, as you do this more and more, your forecast variance, the difference between what you thought would happen and what actually happened, becomes smaller. And you may not realize it, but you're actually learning a lot more about your business as that happens. You're learning a lot more about the sensitivities, the dynamics, and what's really driving the business as you improve and reduce your forecast variance. So I reckon have a good view 3 months ahead and have a healthy look out 1 year at the very least. We do in our business, so Castaway is a fast growth business. So we review every month. So for us, because the pace of change is faster, what normal businesses might do every 3 months, we're doing every 1 month. Okay, it's just the rhythm is quicker.
Yeah.
At the moment, as we're growing, there'll be times when we go and plateau. We may step back then to quarterly. So you kind of adjust your frequency of review to suit your pace of change in the business.
Yeah.
Right now, given uncertainty, I'd be looking at it even every couple of weeks potentially.
So there's an interesting principle in survival is that, we used to instruct people around 5 priorities, which in survival were water, warmth, shelter, signals, and food. And the thought was that, you can pretty much put yourself anywhere under any circumstance. And if you made a plan based on those things, you're going to be pretty right. And the order of priority would change, where your focus would change, but the 5 would hold true. So, if we got tipped out of a raft in the wintertime in a freezing cold river just before sunset, then we're going to have to look after warmth and shelter really quick. We're surrounded by fresh water, so no big issue there. If we're out in the middle of the desert, then shelter and water become really high priority. So just move them as sliders, subject to the situation that you're in. Are there similar principles, if you think particularly thinking about business models at the moment, a lot of people are having to radically adapt to a different kind of normal, different flows of business. Many of us, the pipeline not only dried up, but someone dug it up and recycled it for scrap, I think. So find or build a new pipeline. Are there universal principles like that you can keep a bit of a weather eye on to guide your forecasting and your planning?
Yeah, there are. I mean, there's really 2 different sets of things I'd look at. There's a set of response steps to this COVID process that we talk about, and then there's the more enduring steps around how do you design a business that creates enduring value. So I'll deal with both of those. So in brief, the COVID steps. Number 1 is understand exactly where you are right now, how much cash you've got, and whether you're in cash burn, i.e. your bank balance is dropping every month, or you're in cash growth. If you're in cash burn, what's your runway? If you've got $10,000 in the bank and you're burning $2,500 a month, you've got 4 months left. You've got a 4-month runway. That's it. So understand exactly where you are, what cash you've got, what the burn rate is, and also what other cash you could call on if you needed to. Like if you are in almost cash crisis mode, so how long you've got before you need to do something crazy. Second thing is take great advantage of all the government programs that are around there, with a real bias towards things that give you money permanently that you don't need to pay back. So things like there's some cash grants around. They're great because you don't need to hand that money back. The second option after permanent cash grants are things that you have to pay back, but you can do it later, like deferrals of PAYG repayments and deferrals of tax payments and things. You still got the debt, but you can pay it later. You're pushing the problem down the road, however. And the third and the least favourable thing for me is those where you're taking on debt, you've got to pay back later, but also there's interest in it. Okay. But well, once you understand where you are, I guess you understand how rapidly and how aggressively you've got to act. Third thing is then to dig into your business and be really critical. Like, what we're looking for is the profitable core of the business. Every business has or should have a profitable core, part of the operations that actually makes some money. In a coffee shop, it's selling coffee, for example. Food and table service and all that often doesn't make any money. Not really when you factor all the costs in, but the profitable core is the actual coffee. So understand what the profitable core is and then see what you may need to permanently or temporarily strip away so that you are running bare bones but making the money you can make. Okay, and that includes a fourth thing, which is cut costs. Cut, reduce, or remove costs where you can, but without. I've got to caution again here because I think I've seen too many organisations cut costs. Now, small and large, cut costs, but they end up removing limbs in the process.
Yeah.
Actually damage the business irreparably. Like, you cut costs by stopping your marketing, or you don't maintain your equipment, or you end up triggering some catastrophic failure a little bit further down the track.
Yeah, it's a bit like the debt scenario, isn't it? You're actually just delaying an issue.
Yeah, that's right. And like, there is going to be a challenge coming out of coronavirus, I reckon. If we're asking our businesses to pay not only pay their way in the future, but also pay for the past, we're adding a whole lot more challenge on top. And the last thing is the fifth thing in here is really to think about suppliers and customers, trading terms and things like that. We've seen lots of people saying we're now only delivering on cash on demand. Okay, we're not offering trading terms at all. It's all COD. And if your suppliers are doing that to you, then, well, you could be nice and take the hit, but you've actually got to respond. Now, you've got to take a positive view on what you need to do to survive in business. So that's the kind of coronavirus response thing. But I want to talk about, you picked up on this idea of sort of as we recover and go back to normal, and I think you picked it up as well. I don't think we're going back to normal. I think
it'd be a tragedy normal. If we did.
Yeah, in so many ways, absolutely. I still deal with business owners every day, small and large, who assume that we're, in a couple of months' time, just going to go back to where we were. We've got an office in the city, in Sydney, right near Barangaroo. There's 5 massive towers there. I don't know how, number one, you're going to get staff through the public transport system, through the rat runs around Sydney, into those offices. I don't know how you're going to get them up into the lifts, into those offices. 30,000 staff cannot go up 1 or 2 at a time in the lift. There are practical problems. Gyms. So my other business, the software company, is one, but the gym is the other one. The short response, I think, is that those businesses become non-viable. The business model changes because suddenly it's a 24-hour gym. We have staff there 50 hours a week. Suddenly we need to have them there 168 hours a week, on the door, handing out sanitizer, checking temperatures. The business itself becomes non-viable. And there are, I think, many, many instances where what we thought was the way the business would run, the business model, the profitable core, has been challenged and maybe even permanently removed. Now is the time to be deeply examining our business model. It's also been a great time. Like, in our business, in Castaway, we for years run face-to-face training. We've jumped on planes and gone everywhere. Oodnadatta and Coolangatta and Parramatta and all the other adders and everywhere else in between. And it's an expensive way of getting with customers. COVID has really taught us something. We've been able to deliver training reasonably well across video. It's changed our way of thinking. We're now actually deciding we're abandoning face-to-face training forever. We'll do it over video. That means suddenly it adds a scalability to our business. We can train people around the world, not just around the suburb. Um, so where am I going on that? It's let's abandon the idea that we are going back to normal. Let's take the opportunity to reassess what our business model looks like. There are now delivery mechanisms which mean you can touch customers all over the world. Across the road from me, there's a lady who does yoga training. She's got customers now logging into her yoga courses from all over the world. You would never have imagined that just 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Horizons have changed.
Yeah, they really have. There's an interesting thing. I think the idea of heading back to what used to be normal, when we used to run a 10-day survival walk, which was pretty arduous. People just had a soapbox-sized survival kit in their pocket and a couple of litres of water and whatever clothes they were standing up in.
Yep, extraordinary.
And they'd walk about 200 kilometres in 10 days. So, about 20 Ks a day. So a decent amount of effort. And one of the interesting reflections when you debrief that exercise for just about everybody that went on it was I realised the difference between what I need and what I want. And it almost forces a reflection of, well, if I've managed to get by on so little, why do I surround myself with so much stuff? And it gives the opportunity to really intentionally choose what goes back in the box at the end of the experience. And I think there's a massive opportunity with COVID for exactly the same thing. It's forced us into doing things in ways that we wouldn't normally have done them. It's made us have to adapt. It's made us have to make do. And some of those things we go, well, that just actually sucks. We don't want to keep doing it that way. But I think it's really prudent for us to spend a little bit of time reflecting and go, okay, well, what actually comes back into the box and why? And then are there things that we want to bring back in, but bring back in really different ways? We slip in to use the time that way.
Completely right. We slip into lifestyle habits, business habits, and the like. We pay for the bus, we pay for coffee, we pay for meals, we pay for lunch. As a simple example, for me now, and we used to go to restaurants fairly regularly, simply because we're working in the city, long hours, and instead of cooking, we can take half an hour extra work by buying some takeaway. Very expensive, but now I guess it's different. We're working from home. It's a pleasure to take a break and eat. I think I talked to a lot of people in our position, and they're saying the same thing. They're saving a lot of money right now, but it's also having them reassess what's important. I'm looking forward to going back and having a meal out become a celebration, like it's something special.
Yeah.
However, the knock-on effects then for restaurants is significant. If people, like, we've been under lockdown and restriction for so long, people are generating different habits. You're right. And this is again part of that reassessment of your business model. Like, where are your customers? Who are they really? And what are they going to look like when they come out of lockdown? But it's also the chance to really strip your business back and go, like, to redesign it from a blank piece of paper. Because what the thing is, having been in business for a while, we are now deeply experienced in business, in our own business. Now, we advocate all the time rethinking your business, but now more than ever, it's important. Take a blank bit of paper out and say, right, what do I love doing? What am I passionate about? What am I good at? Where do I make a difference? Are there new differences I can make given what we're seeing in the marketplace? People's demand, customers' demand, whether we're talking mums and dads or businesses, will be different at the end of this process, far different from what they've been in the past. I think there are massive opportunities to be part of the recovery process. Because I think there's been a massive, and I think we'd all agree, there's been a massive impact on everybody. People have been affected mentally, physically, work-wise, business-wise. Out of any confusion comes opportunity, I reckon.
So that almost loops us neatly back to where we started, which was that, you said forecasting is really the act of telling the story first. What's important? Why is it important? Who's it important to? What difference is it making? What value will it add? And then starting to draw the numbers up from there. And that with my head, which is not a, I don't get excited by the numbers, but that process is actually an exciting process,
Yeah.
and one that becomes deeply engaging. Michael, thanks heaps for your time today. I know that you and your partner Joe, who's on the call as well, have been putting in some massive hours and some really odd hours in terms of the Australian clock with your launch into the UK. So you probably haven't had much sleep, and you're probably just about to start hitting the straps for the UK business hours. So thanks for making the time to come and have a chat to us. And if people wanted to know more about Castaway as a forecasting tool, or get more information about you or the business, or contact you about anything, how would they go about doing that?
Go to the website, www.castawayforecasting.com. Find me on LinkedIn, reach out on LinkedIn and let me know you've been on the call. Always happy to chat to people. You know, there's a real interest for us in sort of how people are coping through this process. You know, we started this business so we can make a difference to businesses, and you know, always happy to hear stories.
Yeah, great. Thanks again for your time.
No worries. Doug, did I see there was maybe a question there?
Yeah, quick question. The other vector, I think, we're talking about money and things, and people now are saying, well, I'm having to quit my job, but will I go back to that same job? One of the things that's always been in my mind is the people assets. I've dealt a lot with Hewlett Packard that had one of its greatest values were in its people. Then they made a huge change financially, and they got greedy, and the people left. Yet the people themselves, for many years, kept them very stable. So in down times, those people were still there. They were being productive. They were planning, like now. I think it's a great opportunity. So where does that fit into your equation here?
I think we've got to recognize that people are different now. So people will be more choosy. Our staff will be more choosy. They've got potentially more opportunities. I think the theme coming out of COVID will be resilience. And part of building resilience is building agile businesses, which can cope with staff moving in and around, cope with staff doing different things. I think it's also what it's leading us to is a reassessment of the value of our people, like a much greater appreciation of their own resilience. Like all of our staff have been through incredible change in the last 6 weeks, and they've shown they can innovate fast. That, I think, excites me, to start to tap into and ask more of, or give more opportunities for our people to contribute to innovation, to broader thinking, to creating difference that actually excites them as well as us. We've seen businesses change. They've done changes in 2 days that they would ordinarily have taken 12 months to do. I think we're getting into a rich seam of innovation coming for in the right companies. Smart companies will encourage their teams, their people to lift and do extraordinary things. But by the same token, we've also got to build businesses that are resilient and allow people to come in, make a great difference, and then leave. Because I think that's where, you know, there's a more transient workforce coming as people start to reassess what's important in their lives. It may sound a bit like I'm sitting on the fence, but I see great opportunity in building businesses that can hold people for a few years and help them become the best version of themselves they can be, make a contribution to the business, then pass on to their next adventure. Does that make sense?
Great. Thanks for the question, Doug, and thanks very much again, Michael. Really appreciate it. I look forward to the opportunity when we're allowed out of our houses and our states again, to sitting down to a nice smoky whiskey and a nice meal somewhere with you on your side of the country in Sydney.
Guaranteed.
If you're joining us next week, we've got the wonderful Suzanne Waldron joining us on the call. Suzanne's a TEDx curator here in WA, in Perth, and has travelled widely and seen some of the best and brightest minds around the planet in that platform. She's also a specialist in human behavioural change, and a wonderful thinker with delightful energy. So we'll have a wide-ranging conversation next week about some of the human and social impacts of COVID and implications in that space for recovery. And it'll be a bit of an exciting romp through some of the best thinking on the planet at the moment, I'm sure. I look forward to seeing you then if you join us, or picking it up via the recording if you come in that way. Thanks very much for joining us.